The Malibu mansion's infinity pool gleamed like liquid sapphire in the golden hour light as Scarlett Sterling adjusted the angle for her Instagram story, ensuring her followers could see both the ocean view and the $2.8 million Bugatti Chiron parked in the circular driveway below. At 29, she had built CryptoFlow Financial into one of the fastest-growing fintech companies in Los Angeles, and her social media presence celebrated every milestone of her meteoric rise. "Living my best life while building the future of finance," she captioned the video, adding hashtags about cryptocurrency, female entrepreneurship, and luxury lifestyle that would generate thousands of likes within hours. Scarlett's personal brand was inseparable from CryptoFlow's corporate image, a young, brilliant CEO who had revolutionized Bitcoin transaction processing while maintaining the glamorous lifestyle that proved financial technology could be both profitable and exciting. Her 3 million Instagram followers watched her jet between Silicon Valley board meetings and Monaco yacht parties, always dressed in designer clothing and surrounded by the symbols of extraordinary wealth. But the most impressive aspect of Scarlett's success wasn't her personal luxury, it was the scale of CryptoFlow's operations. The company processed over $500 million in Bitcoin transactions monthly, serving clients from tech startups to international investment firms who needed fast, reliable cryptocurrency exchange services. CryptoFlow represents the democratization of global finance, Scarlett had explained during her TED Talk 6 months earlier, standing on stage in a $15,000 Hermes dress and Jimmy Choo heels that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "We're eliminating the barriers that have prevented ordinary people from accessing the same financial tools that banks and governments use to control money flow." The speech had been viewed over 2 million times, establishing Scarlett as one of the most recognizable faces in cryptocurrency and earning her invitations to speak at conferences worldwide. Her message about financial democratization resonated with audiences who saw traditional banking as outdated and exclusionary. But what Scarlett's followers and conference audiences didn't know was that CryptoFlow's rapid growth and her spectacular lifestyle were built on services that went far beyond legitimate cryptocurrency transactions. Ms. Sterling, her Chief Technology Officer Marcus Whitmore had said during a private meeting in her Beverly Hills office, "We need to discuss some concerns about the compliance protocols for our high-volume clients." Scarlett looked up from her phone, where she had been editing photos from her recent trip to Dubai, featuring herself wearing an $800,000 diamond necklace aboard a private yacht. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly interested in technical compliance issues. "Several of our largest clients are requesting transaction services that seem designed to obscure the source and destination of funds," Marcus explained. "The volumes and patterns suggest money laundering rather than legitimate business operations." "Marcus," Scarlett replied with the condescending patience she used when explaining business realities to technical staff, "our clients use CryptoFlow because we provide fast, efficient Bitcoin processing without the bureaucratic delays that traditional financial institutions impose. If their transaction patterns seem complex, it's because sophisticated investors use sophisticated strategies. But some of these clients have been flagged by FinCEN and other regulatory agencies," Marcus pressed. "Continuing to process their transactions could expose us to serious legal liability." Scarlett's expression hardened in a way that Marcus had learned to recognize as the end of discussion. "Our legal team has reviewed our compliance procedures, and we're operating within all applicable regulations. Your job is to ensure our technical infrastructure can handle client demands, not to question their business practices." What Marcus didn't know, and what Scarlett was careful never to discuss in company meetings, was that CryptoFlow's most profitable clients were criminal organizations that paid premium fees for cryptocurrency laundering services disguised as legitimate fintech operations. The Colombian cartel that generated $50 million monthly in Bitcoin transactions through CryptoFlow wasn't investing in blockchain technology. They were converting drug profits into clean digital assets that could be transferred internationally without traditional banking oversight. The Eastern European cybercrime syndicate that processed $30 million in cryptocurrency through Scarlett's platform wasn't building a legitimate business. They were laundering proceeds from ransomware attacks and financial fraud. But these clients paid 10 times the standard transaction fees and never questioned CryptoFlow's premium pricing, generating the extraordinary profits that funded Scarlett's lifestyle and the company's rapid expansion. The beauty of cryptocurrency, Charlotte had explained to her inner circle of executives who were aware of CryptoFlow's real business model, is that it allows us to serve clients who are underserved by traditional banking, regardless of why traditional banks won't work with them. This philosophy had attracted clients from around the world who needed cryptocurrency laundering services, transforming CryptoFlow from a legitimate fintech startup into one of the largest Bitcoin money laundering operations in the United States. But Charlotte's success had also made her increasingly reckless about operational security and public attention. Her social media presence documented a lifestyle that would have been impossible to maintain on the revenues from legitimate cryptocurrency processing, and her boastful posts about wealth and luxury were creating a digital trail that connected her personal finances to CryptoFlow's criminal profits. Charlotte, her communications director Evangeline Cross had warned during a recent strategy meeting, the contrast between your public lifestyle and CryptoFlow's stated business model is generating questions from financial journalists and regulatory analysts. What kind of questions? Charlotte asked, though she was more focused on selecting jewelry for an upcoming red carpet event than discussing media strategy. Questions about how a cryptocurrency processing company generates enough profit to support the lifestyle you're documenting on social media, Evangeline explained. Some reporters are starting to investigate the math behind your success. Let them investigate, Charlotte replied with the arrogance that had grown alongside her wealth and social media following. CryptoFlow is revolutionizing financial technology, and revolutionary companies generate revolutionary returns for their founders. But what Charlotte didn't realize was that federal investigators had been monitoring CryptoFlow's operations for months, building a comprehensive case that connected the company's Bitcoin transactions to criminal organizations worldwide. The lifestyle she documented so carefully on social media wasn't just attracting admiring followers, it was providing law enforcement with evidence of proceeds from money laundering that would ultimately destroy everything she had built. The digital empress who had celebrated every aspect of her success online was about to discover that social media could be as powerful a tool for prosecution as it had been for self-promotion. The first indication that Charlotte's empire might be under scrutiny came during a seemingly routine compliance meeting with CryptoFlow's banking partners in downtown Los Angeles. Pacific Coast Bank, which had processed CryptoFlow's traditional currency transactions for 3 years, had requested an expanded due diligence review that required detailed documentation of the company's client base and transaction patterns. Ms. Sterling, explained Patricia Ravencroft, the bank's chief compliance officer, federal regulators have been asking questions about cryptocurrency companies that process high-volume transactions for international clients. We need to update our records about CryptoFlow's business model and risk management procedures. Charlotte arrived at the meeting wearing a $25,000 Cartier watch and carrying a Birkin bag worth more than most people's cars, her appearance a stark contrast to the conservative banking environment. But her confidence began to waver as she realized the questions were more specific and probing than previous compliance reviews. What kinds of questions are regulators asking? Charlotte inquired, trying to maintain her usual authoritative demeanor. Questions about how cryptocurrency platforms verify the source of funds for large transactions, Patricia replied, consulting a thick folder of regulatory guidance documents, particularly transactions that involve clients from countries with limited banking transparency or high money laundering risk. Charlotte felt her heart rate accelerate as she realized that several of CryptoFlow's most profitable clients operated from exactly those types of jurisdictions, but she forced herself to respond with the same dismissive confidence she used with her own technical staff. CryptoFlow maintains industry-leading compliance procedures, she said, though she knew her compliance procedures were designed to avoid asking questions that might discourage high-paying clients. We work with reputable businesses worldwide who are embracing the future of digital finance. The regulators are particularly interested in transaction patterns that might indicate money laundering, Patricia continued. Large volumes, frequent transfers between multiple wallets, rapid conversion between different cryptocurrencies, geographical patterns that don't match stated business purposes. Each item on Patricia's list described standard practices among CryptoFlow's most profitable clients, and Charlotte realized that federal investigators might already understand the true nature of her company's operations better than she had assumed. "Of course, we're happy to cooperate with any regulatory inquiries," Scarlett replied, though her mind was racing through the implications of increased scrutiny from banking regulators and federal law enforcement. That evening, instead of her usual social media posts featuring expensive dinners and luxury shopping, Scarlett found herself in her Malibu mansion's home office, reviewing CryptoFlow's transaction records with growing anxiety. The numbers were staggering in ways that would be difficult to explain to investigators who understood legitimate business operations. CryptoFlow was processing $500 million monthly in Bitcoin transactions, while reporting annual revenues that suggested profit margins impossible for legitimate financial services. More problematic were the client patterns that Marcus Whitmore had tried to warn her about months earlier. The same clients were processing massive transactions repeatedly, always in amounts just below reporting thresholds, always involving rapid transfers through multiple cryptocurrency wallets, always terminating in jurisdictions with banking secrecy laws. "This is exactly what money laundering looks like," Scarlett admitted to herself for the first time, finally acknowledging what she had been willfully ignoring for years. But rather than developing legitimate compliance procedures or discontinuing relationships with criminal clients, Scarlett's response was to become more sophisticated about concealing CryptoFlow's illegal activities. "We need to implement enhanced privacy protocols," she told her inner circle during an emergency meeting at her Beverly Hills office. "Our clients value discretion, and we need to ensure their transaction data remains completely confidential." "What kind of privacy protocols?" asked Thomas Sterling, CryptoFlow's chief financial officer, who had been increasingly uncomfortable with the company's client base but had been reluctant to challenge Scarlett's leadership. "Encrypted record-keeping, compartmentalized transaction data, offshore backup systems," Scarlett explained, describing a structure designed to make it impossible for investigators to trace Bitcoin flows from clients to recipients. "We're going to become the most secure cryptocurrency platform in the world." This decision to enhance CryptoFlow's operational security while continuing to serve criminal clients represented a critical escalation from negligent compliance to active money laundering conspiracy. But Scarlett's arrogance and addiction to social media attention prevented her from understanding that increased operational security was meaningless when she was documenting her criminal profits through her lifestyle posts on Instagram and Twitter. "Look at this incredible art collection," she posted from her mansion's gallery, featuring $3 million worth of paintings purchased with money laundering profits. "Investing in culture while building the future of finance." "At private jet life," she captioned another post from her $60 million Gulfstream, flying to a cryptocurrency conference where she would speak about ethical innovation in financial technology. Each post provided federal investigators with evidence of assets that would be impossible to purchase with legitimate cryptocurrency processing profits, creating a digital trail that connected her personal wealth to CryptoFlow's criminal operations. Scarlett, her social media manager Arabella Cross warned during one of their strategy sessions, "The lifestyle content is generating questions from financial journalists about how CryptoFlow generates enough profit to support your spending." "Good," Scarlett replied, completely missing the danger of increased media attention. "Let people wonder how successful someone can become by revolutionizing finance. The publicity will attract more clients and investors." But the publicity was also attracting attention from federal investigators who were building a comprehensive case against CryptoFlow's money laundering operations. Unknown to Scarlett, the FBI had been monitoring her social media activity for months, using her posts to trace the flow of criminal proceeds from CryptoFlow's operations to her personal assets and lifestyle expenses. The digital evidence she was creating through her social media presence would ultimately provide prosecutors with a detailed record of how money laundering profits had been used to purchase every luxury item, every piece of real estate, and every experience she had documented online. The woman who had built her success on digital innovation was about to discover that digital technology could be as powerful a tool for law enforcement as it had been for criminal enterprise. The federal investigation into CryptoFlow Financial reached a critical juncture when Agent Elena Blackwood of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit obtained access to encrypted communications between Scarlett Sterling and her largest criminal clients. The breakthrough came through a cooperation agreement with Marcus Whitmore, who had finally decided that his concerns about CryptoFlow's illegal activities outweighed his loyalty to Scarlett. "Ms. Sterling has been actively coordinating with known criminal organizations to structure Bitcoin transactions that avoid regulatory reporting requirements, Marcus testified during a sealed grand jury proceeding. She personally negotiated fee structures and operational procedures designed to facilitate money laundering. Marcus provided federal investigators with detailed documentation of CryptoFlow's criminal client relationships, including encrypted messaging logs that showed Charlotte explicitly discussing how to disguise illegal transaction patterns as legitimate business activities. "We can structure the transfers to look like normal business-to-business payments," Charlotte had written to Viktor Kozlov, a Russian cybercrime leader whose organization had laundered $180 million through CryptoFlow. "Just keep individual transactions under $50,000 and use different wallet addresses for each transfer." These communications eliminated any possibility that Charlotte could claim ignorance about her client's criminal activities or argue that CryptoFlow was unknowingly facilitating money laundering. But even as federal investigators gathered evidence for criminal charges, Charlotte continued posting social media content that documented her luxury lifestyle and celebrated CryptoFlow's growth. "Another incredible quarter for CryptoFlow," she posted from her new $15 million penthouse in Manhattan, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "Revolutionary technology creating revolutionary results." The timing of her real estate purchase was particularly problematic because federal investigators could trace the funding directly to fees collected from criminal organizations during the same quarter. Charlotte's social media activity is essentially providing us with a real-time inventory of assets purchased with money laundering proceeds, Agent Blackwood explained to prosecutors. "She's documenting the entire process of converting criminal profits into personal wealth." The federal case against Charlotte and CryptoFlow was strengthened further when international law enforcement agencies shared intelligence about the criminal organizations that comprised the company's client base. CryptoFlow was processing transactions for cartels, cybercrime syndicates, terrorist financing networks, and human trafficking organizations, explained Agent Thomas Meridian of Interpol during a coordination meeting with U.S. prosecutors. "They weren't just facilitating money laundering. They were enabling some of the most serious criminal enterprises operating internationally." This intelligence revealed that Charlotte's operation had grown far beyond domestic money laundering to become a critical component of global criminal finance, processing over $2 billion in illegal transactions over 4 years. But Charlotte remained focused on expanding CryptoFlow's operations and her personal brand, apparently confident that her company's technical sophistication and her public profile would protect her from regulatory scrutiny. "Excited to announce CryptoFlow's expansion into European markets," she posted from London, where she was meeting with potential partners while wearing $500,000 worth of jewelry. "Taking our revolutionary approach to cryptocurrency processing global." Unknown to Charlotte, federal agents were monitoring her international travel and coordinating with foreign law enforcement agencies to gather evidence about CryptoFlow's overseas operations. The European expansion she was celebrating would ultimately provide prosecutors with additional evidence of international money laundering conspiracy that would increase her potential prison sentence significantly. Meanwhile, CryptoFlow's employees were beginning to suspect that their company was under federal investigation as banking relationships became strained and compliance requirements became more demanding. "There are rumors that federal agents have been interviewing former employees," Thomas Sterling told Charlotte during a private meeting at her Malibu mansion. "People are worried about potential criminal liability." "Let them worry," Charlotte replied, displaying the arrogance that had grown alongside her wealth and social media following. "CryptoFlow operates within all applicable regulations, and our legal team has assured me that our business practices are completely legitimate." But Charlotte's legal team hadn't been informed about the full extent of CryptoFlow's criminal client relationships or the explicit communications she had maintained with money laundering organizations. The attorneys who had provided compliance advice were operating under the assumption that CryptoFlow was a legitimate fintech company that might inadvertently be serving some questionable clients, not a deliberate money laundering operation that actively coordinated with criminal organizations. "We need to consider potential criminal exposure," advised attorney Cornelius Cross during a meeting about CryptoFlow's regulatory challenges. "Money laundering charges carry significant penalties, and the government has been increasingly aggressive about prosecuting financial technology companies that facilitate illegal transactions. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Scarlett asked, finally beginning to understand that her legal situation might be more serious than she had assumed. For money laundering conspiracy, potentially decades in federal prison, Attorney Cross replied, plus forfeiture of all assets connected to criminal proceeds, which could include personal property purchased with company profits. The mention of asset forfeiture caught Scarlett's attention because it threatened the lifestyle and possessions that defined her public image and personal identity. They can't seize personal assets that weren't directly purchased with criminal funds, she said, though her statement revealed how little she understood about federal forfeiture laws. If those assets were purchased with profits from criminal activity, they're subject to forfeiture, regardless of how many degrees of separation exist between the original crimes and the final purchases, Attorney Cross explained. This legal reality meant that Scarlett's mansions, cars, jewelry, art collection, and other luxury assets could all be seized by federal authorities if prosecutors could demonstrate they had been purchased with CryptoFlow's money laundering profits. But rather than accepting this risk and discontinuing CryptoFlow's criminal operations, Scarlett decided to accelerate her timeline for international expansion and asset diversification. "We're going to move more operations offshore," she announced to her senior staff. "Switzerland, Luxembourg, Cayman Islands, jurisdictions with strong privacy protections and banking confidentiality laws." This decision to expand CryptoFlow's international operations, while under federal investigation, would ultimately provide prosecutors with additional evidence of criminal conspiracy and flight risk that would justify more aggressive enforcement actions. The digital empress, who had celebrated every aspect of her success online, was about to discover that federal investigators had been monitoring her activities as carefully as her social media followers, building a comprehensive case that would ultimately destroy the empire she had worked years to create. The coordinated federal raids on CryptoFlow Financial's offices and Scarlett Sterling's properties began at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, involving over 200 FBI agents, IRS investigators, and asset forfeiture unit specialists across multiple states. The timing was designed to prevent evidence destruction and asset concealment, but the scale of the operation reflected the magnitude of the money laundering conspiracy that investigators had uncovered. Scarlett was arrested at her Malibu mansion while preparing for a morning yoga session that she had planned to live stream to her Instagram followers. The juxtaposition of federal agents executing search warrants while she wore $3,000 Lululemon workout clothes would later become symbolic of how completely her luxurious lifestyle had been built on criminal proceeds. "Scarlett Sterling," Agent Elena Blackwood announced as handcuffs were applied, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, and violating the Bank Secrecy Act." As Scarlett was read her rights, other federal agents throughout her mansion were cataloging and seizing assets that totaled over $47 million in personal property, cars, jewelry, art, electronics, and cash that prosecutors would argue had been purchased with CryptoFlow's criminal profits. "This is insane," Scarlett protested as she watched agents loading her Bugatti onto a transport truck. "I built a legitimate business that revolutionized cryptocurrency processing. You're destroying an innovative company because you don't understand financial technology." But Agent Blackwood had spent months studying CryptoFlow's operations and was prepared for Scarlett's attempts to characterize her money laundering operation as legitimate innovation. "Ms. Sterling," the agent replied, "we have documented evidence that CryptoFlow processed over $2 billion in transactions for criminal organizations, while you personally coordinated with money launderers to structure transfers that would avoid regulatory detection." Simultaneously with Scarlett's arrest, FBI agents were executing search warrants at CryptoFlow's Beverly Hills headquarters, seizing servers, computers, and business records that contained comprehensive documentation of the company's criminal client relationships. The evidence collected during the raids would ultimately fill thousands of pages and provide prosecutors with detailed proof of money laundering conspiracy that extended over 4 years and involved criminal organizations from 6 countries. But perhaps the most damaging evidence against Scarlett was the digital trail she had created through her social media activity, which federal investigators had been monitoring and archiving throughout their investigation. The defendant's Instagram and Twitter accounts provide a real-time record of assets purchased with criminal proceeds, prosecutor Margaret Whitmore explained during Scarlett's initial court appearance. Her social media posts document the conversion of money laundering profits into personal wealth with unprecedented detail. The federal indictment against Scarlett included charges that carried potential sentences totaling over 100 years in prison, reflecting both the scale of CryptoFlow's criminal operations and Scarlett's leadership role in the money laundering conspiracy. Count 1. Conspiracy to commit money laundering in violation of 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1956, the prosecutor read during Scarlett's arraignment. Count 2. Operating an unlicensed money transmitting business in violation of 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1960. Count 3. Conspiracy to violate the Bank Secrecy Act. The list continued for 27 separate criminal charges, each carrying substantial prison sentences and forfeiture penalties that would eliminate any possibility of Scarlett maintaining her previous lifestyle. But even facing federal prosecution, Scarlett's initial response was to maintain her public image and continue claiming that CryptoFlow was a legitimate business that had been unfairly targeted by regulators who didn't understand cryptocurrency innovation. Fighting against government overreach and regulatory ignorance, she posted on social media from jail using her attorney's phone, apparently not understanding that continued public statements about her case could be used as evidence against her. Her social media activity immediately after arrest demonstrated the same arrogance and lack of judgment that had led to her posting lifestyle content funded by criminal proceeds, providing prosecutors with additional evidence of her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. The defendant's continued social media activity shows a complete lack of remorse or understanding of the seriousness of her criminal conduct, Prosecutor Whitmore argued during Scarlett's detention hearing. She continues to characterize money laundering as legitimate business innovation. The evidence presented during pre-trial hearings revealed the full scope of CryptoFlow's criminal operations, including detailed communications between Scarlett and criminal organization leaders that showed explicit coordination of money laundering activities. "We can increase processing capacity for your operations," Scarlett had written to Diego Hernandez, leader of a Colombian cartel that had laundered $340 million through CryptoFlow. "Higher volumes will qualify for our premium service rates with enhanced privacy protections." These communications eliminated any possibility of claiming that CryptoFlow had unknowingly facilitated money laundering or that Scarlett had been unaware of her client's criminal activities. But perhaps the most revealing evidence was the financial analysis that showed how CryptoFlow's criminal profits had funded Scarlett's extravagant lifestyle and social media presence. The defendant purchased a $15 million Manhattan penthouse using funds received directly from a Romanian cybercrime syndicate's money laundering transactions, federal forensic accountant Patricia Sterling testified. Her $2.8 million Bugatti was purchased using proceeds from Mexican cartel Bitcoin transfers. This testimony established clear connections between specific criminal transactions and Scarlett's personal assets, supporting the government's asset forfeiture claims and demonstrating how completely her luxury lifestyle had been dependent on money laundering profits. As the evidence mounted and plea negotiations began, Scarlett was forced to confront the reality that her cryptocurrency empire had been built entirely on criminal activity and that her social media presence had provided prosecutors with comprehensive documentation of her crimes. The digital empress, who had celebrated every aspect of her success online, was about to discover that her carefully curated public image would become the foundation for federal prosecutors to demonstrate how criminal proceeds had been converted into the luxury lifestyle she had documented with such pride. The woman who had thought she was revolutionizing finance had actually been facilitating some of the most serious criminal enterprises operating globally, and her arrogance about flaunting the profits online had provided law enforcement with unprecedented evidence of money laundering conspiracy. The coordinated federal raids on CryptoFlow Financial's offices and Scarlett Sterling's properties began at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, involving over 200 FBI agents, IRS investigators, and asset forfeiture unit specialists across multiple states. The timing was designed to prevent evidence destruction and asset concealment, but the scale of the operation reflected the magnitude of the money laundering conspiracy that investigators had uncovered. Scarlett was arrested at her Malibu mansion while preparing for a morning yoga session that she had planned to live stream to her Instagram followers. The juxtaposition of federal agents executing search warrants while she wore $3,000 Lululemon workout clothes would later become symbolic of how completely her luxurious lifestyle had been built on criminal proceeds. "Scarlett Sterling," Agent Elena Blackwood announced as handcuffs were applied, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, and violating the Bank Secrecy Act." As Scarlett was read her rights, other federal agents throughout her mansion were cataloging and seizing assets that totaled over $47 million in personal property, cars, jewelry, art, electronics, and cash that prosecutors would argue had been purchased with CryptoFlow's criminal profits. "This is insane," Scarlett protested as she watched agents loading her Bugatti onto a transport truck. "I built a legitimate business that revolutionized cryptocurrency processing. You're destroying an innovative company because you don't understand financial technology." But Agent Blackwood had spent months studying CryptoFlow's operations and was prepared for Scarlett's attempts to characterize her money laundering operation as legitimate innovation. "Ms. Sterling," the agent replied, "we have documented evidence that CryptoFlow processed over $2 billion in transactions for criminal organizations while you personally coordinated with money launderers to structure transfers that would avoid regulatory detection." Simultaneously with Scarlett's arrest, FBI agents were executing search warrants at CryptoFlow's Beverly Hills headquarters, seizing servers, computers, and business records that contained comprehensive documentation of the company's criminal client relationships. The evidence collected during the raids would ultimately fill thousands of pages and provide prosecutors with detailed proof of money laundering conspiracy that extended over 4 years and involved criminal organizations from 6 countries. But perhaps the most damaging evidence against Scarlett was the digital trail she had created through her social media activity, which federal investigators had been monitoring and archiving throughout their investigation. The defendant's Instagram and Twitter accounts provide a real-time record of assets purchased with criminal proceeds, prosecutor Margaret Whitmore explained during Scarlett's initial court appearance. Her social media posts document the conversion of money, laundering profits into personal wealth with unprecedented detail. The federal indictment against Scarlett included charges that carried potential sentences totaling over 100 years in prison, reflecting both the scale of CryptoFlow's criminal operations and Scarlett's leadership role in the money laundering conspiracy. Count 1. Conspiracy to commit money laundering in violation of 18 U.S.C. par of 1956, the prosecutor read during Scarlett's arraignment. Count 2. Operating an unlicensed money transmitting business in violation of 18 U.S.C. par of 1960. Count 3. Conspiracy to violate the Bank Secrecy Act. The list continued for 27 separate criminal charges, each carrying substantial prison sentences and forfeiture penalties that would eliminate any possibility of Scarlett maintaining her previous lifestyle. But even facing federal prosecution, Scarlett's initial response was to maintain her public image and continue claiming that CryptoFlow was a legitimate business that had been unfairly targeted by regulators who didn't understand cryptocurrency innovation. Fighting against government overreach and regulatory ignorance, she posted on social media from jail using her attorney's phone, apparently not understanding that continued public statements about her case could be used as evidence against her. Her social media activity immediately after arrest demonstrated the same arrogance and lack of judgment that had led to her posting lifestyle content funded by criminal proceeds, providing prosecutors with additional evidence of her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. The defendant's continued social media activity shows a complete lack of remorse or understanding of the seriousness of her criminal conduct, prosecutor Whitmore argued during Scarlett's detention hearing. She continues to characterize money laundering as legitimate business innovation. The evidence presented during pre-trial hearings revealed the full scope of CryptoFlow's criminal operations, including detailed communications between Scarlett and criminal organization leaders that showed explicit coordination of money laundering activities. "We can increase processing capacity for your operations," Scarlett had written to Diego Hernandez, leader of a Colombian cartel that had laundered $340 million through CryptoFlow. "Higher volumes will qualify for our premium service rates with enhanced privacy protections. These communications eliminated any possibility of claiming that CryptoFlow had unknowingly facilitated money laundering or that Charlotte had been unaware of her client's criminal activities. But perhaps the most revealing evidence was the financial analysis that showed how CryptoFlow's criminal profits had funded Charlotte's extravagant lifestyle and social media presence. The defendant purchased a $15 million Manhattan penthouse using funds received directly from a Romanian cybercrime syndicate's money laundering transactions, federal forensic accountant Patricia Sterling testified. Her $2.8 million Bugatti was purchased using proceeds from Mexican cartel Bitcoin transfers. This testimony established clear connections between specific criminal transactions and Charlotte's personal assets, supporting the government's asset forfeiture claims and demonstrating how completely her luxury lifestyle had been dependent on money laundering profits. As the evidence mounted and plea negotiations began, Charlotte was forced to confront the reality that her cryptocurrency empire had been built entirely on criminal activity and that her social media presence had provided prosecutors with comprehensive documentation of her crimes. The digital empress, who had celebrated every aspect of her success online, was about to discover that her carefully curated public image would become the foundation for federal prosecutors to demonstrate how criminal proceeds had been converted into the luxury lifestyle she had documented with such pride. The woman who had thought she was revolutionizing finance had actually been facilitating some of the most serious criminal enterprises operating globally, and her arrogance about flaunting the profits online had provided law enforcement with unprecedented evidence of money laundering conspiracy. Capítulo 5. Consecuencias y Perdas. 6 months after her arrest, Charlotte Sterling sat in a federal detention facility in Los Angeles, watching news coverage of her case on a communal television while wearing the orange jumpsuit that had replaced her designer wardrobe. The transformation from cryptocurrency CEO to federal inmate had been swift and total, but the media attention continued to follow every development in her prosecution. Former Fintech CEO Charlotte Sterling's money laundering operation processed over $2 billion for criminal organizations worldwide, the CNN anchor reported, displaying images of Charlotte's seized assets being auctioned by federal authorities. Her social media posts documenting luxury purchases are being used as evidence to trace criminal proceeds. Watching federal agents inventory her art collection and jewelry for public auction was painful, but more devastating was seeing how completely her public image had been transformed from successful entrepreneur to criminal mastermind. The same social media platforms that had celebrated her success were now documenting her downfall, with former followers expressing shock, betrayal, and satisfaction at her prosecution. "I can't believe I was inspired by someone who was basically a criminal," one former follower commented on news coverage of her case. "All that luxury was funded by drug cartels and human traffickers. She deserves everything that's happening to her," added another comment. "Using cryptocurrency to help the worst criminals in the world while pretending to be a tech innovator." The public reaction to her case was uniformly negative, with no sympathy for someone who had facilitated money laundering while flaunting the criminal proceeds on social media. But Charlotte's legal situation was even worse than the social media reaction suggested. Prosecutors had offered a plea agreement that would require her to cooperate with ongoing investigations of her criminal clients in exchange for a reduced sentence of 25 years in federal prison. "The government's offer represents substantial consideration of your cooperation value," her attorney Cornelius Cross explained during one of their jail meetings. "Without a plea agreement, you're facing potential life imprisonment on the money laundering conspiracy charges." 25 years is my entire life," Charlotte replied, still struggling to accept that her cryptocurrency empire had resulted in criminal charges that could keep her in prison until she was in her 50s. "The alternative could be much worse," Attorney Cross warned. "The government has extensive evidence of your direct coordination with criminal organizations, and your social media posts provide comprehensive documentation of assets purchased with criminal proceeds." The plea negotiations had revealed the full scope of evidence that prosecutors had gathered against Charlotte, including thousands of hours of intercepted communications, financial records tracing criminal transactions, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who had worked with CryptoFlow's criminal clients. "They have recordings of you explicitly discussing money laundering techniques with cartel leaders," Attorney Cross explained. Your social media posts show you purchasing millions of dollars in assets during the same time periods when crypto flow was processing payments for those same criminal organizations. This evidence made conviction virtually certain if Scarlett proceeded to trial, but accepting the plea agreement would require her to testify against criminal organizations that had the resources and motivation to retaliate against witnesses who cooperated with law enforcement. Some of your former clients have already been arrested based on evidence from the crypto flow investigation, Attorney Cross continued. But the most dangerous organizations are still operating, and they're not going to be pleased about your cooperation with federal prosecutors. The safety concerns were real, because Scarlett's testimony could help convict criminal leaders whose organizations had killed witnesses and informants in previous cases. But refusing to cooperate would result in a sentence that would effectively end her life, while accepting the plea agreement offered some possibility of eventual release and witness protection assistance. "I need guarantees about witness protection and prison safety," Scarlett told her attorney. "If I'm going to testify against cartels and crime syndicates, I need assurance that the government can protect me." These negotiations revealed how completely Scarlett had underestimated the dangers of facilitating money laundering for violent criminal organizations whose operations extended far beyond financial crimes. Meanwhile, the civil asset forfeiture proceedings were systematically dismantling every aspect of the luxury lifestyle that Scarlett had documented on social media. The defendant's Malibu mansion sold for $18.7 million at federal auction, reported the financial news coverage that Scarlett watched obsessively from jail. Proceeds will be distributed to victims of the criminal organizations that used crypto flow for money laundering. Her car collection, jewelry, art, and other personal property were being sold systematically, with federal authorities using her social media posts to establish the connection between each asset and specific criminal transactions. The Bugatti Chiron that appeared in dozens of the defendant's Instagram posts was purchased using funds received from Colombian cartel money laundering operations, federal prosecutors had argued in forfeiture proceedings. Her social media activity provides detailed documentation of how criminal proceeds were converted into personal assets. The forfeiture process was recovering over $85 million in assets that had been purchased with crypto flow's criminal profits, but the money would go to law enforcement agencies and victim compensation funds rather than back to Scarlett. But perhaps the most painful aspect of her imprisonment was the complete collapse of the relationships and social network that had defined her identity during her successful years. None of her celebrity friends, business associates, or social media collaborators had maintained contact after her arrest, apparently unwilling to associate themselves with someone facing federal money laundering charges. "Everyone who celebrated my success when it benefited them has disappeared now that I need support," Scarlett wrote in her journal, one of the few possessions she was allowed to keep in federal detention. The isolation was particularly difficult because Scarlett had built her entire identity around external validation and social media attention, and imprisonment had eliminated both sources of self-worth simultaneously. After months of negotiations, Scarlett ultimately accepted the government's plea agreement, agreeing to cooperate with ongoing investigations in exchange for a 25-year sentence with possibility of supervised release after 20 years. "I accept responsibility for my actions and recognize that crypto flow facilitated serious crimes that harmed communities worldwide," Scarlett said during her sentencing hearing, reading from a statement prepared by her attorneys. But the judge's response suggested that Scarlett's expressions of remorse were insufficient given the scale of her criminal enterprise and her role in enabling violence by criminal organizations. The defendant operated one of the largest money laundering operations in U.S. history while flaunting the criminal proceeds on social media, Judge Patricia Meridian said during sentencing. Her crimes facilitated drug trafficking, human trafficking, cybercrime, and terrorist financing that caused immeasurable harm to victims worldwide. The 25-year sentence was severe, but reflected the seriousness of money laundering conspiracy charges and Scarlett's leadership role in facilitating international criminal organizations. As Scarlett was transferred to federal prison to begin serving her sentence, she understood that the social media empire she had built to celebrate her success had ultimately provided prosecutors with the evidence needed to destroy her life completely. The digital empress who had documented every luxury purchase and celebrated every business milestone online had created a comprehensive record of how criminal proceeds had been converted into personal wealth, providing law enforcement with unprecedented evidence of money laundering conspiracy. The woman who had thought she was revolutionizing finance had actually been facilitating some of the world's most dangerous criminal enterprises, and her arrogance about flaunting the profits had ensured that justice would ultimately be served. 5 years into her federal prison sentence, Charlotte Sterling had been transformed from the social media-obsessed CEO who had flaunted her criminal proceeds online to a woman who understood the devastating consequences of the money laundering operation she had built and celebrated. The federal correctional institution where she was serving her sentence had provided her with time to reflect on how her pursuit of wealth and status had enabled some of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. The luxury lifestyle that had once defined her identity seemed like a distant dream from her small prison cell, where her most valuable possessions were books about financial crime, letters from federal prosecutors seeking her continued cooperation, and journals where she documented her thoughts about the choices that had led to her imprisonment. "I used to think success meant having the most expensive things and the most impressive lifestyle," Charlotte wrote in one journal entry. "I never considered where the money was coming from, or what crimes were being committed to generate the profits I was taking as fees." Her cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in the prosecution of over 200 members of criminal organizations that had used crypto flow for money laundering, including cartel leaders, cybercrime bosses, and terrorist financiers whose operations had been disrupted by evidence she had provided. Mrs. Sterling's testimony has been instrumental in dismantling several major criminal enterprises, FBI agent Elena Blackwood had reported to the court during one of Charlotte's cooperation reviews. Her detailed knowledge of money laundering techniques and client relationships has enabled prosecutions that would have been impossible without her assistance. But Charlotte's cooperation had also made her a target for retaliation by criminal organizations whose members had been imprisoned based on her testimony, requiring her to be housed in protective custody with limited contact with other inmates. The isolation was difficult, but it had provided Charlotte with opportunities for education and reflection that were changing her understanding of both her crimes and her potential for rehabilitation. "I've been studying the communities that were harmed by the criminal organizations I helped finance," Charlotte explained during a meeting with Dr. Margaret Cross, a criminologist who was researching money laundering operations, drug trafficking, human trafficking, cybercrime, terrorism. My company processed transactions that enabled violence and exploitation worldwide. This education had been painful, but necessary for Charlotte to understand the true scope of harm that had resulted from crypto flow's operations and her decision to prioritize profits over the consequences of facilitating criminal activities. "The cartels that used our services killed thousands of people," Charlotte continued. "The cybercrime syndicates we worked with stole money from small businesses and elderly victims. The terrorist organizations we enabled used our platform to finance attacks that killed innocent people." Dr. Cross was documenting Charlotte's transformation as part of research into how white-collar criminals could develop genuine understanding of their crimes' consequences and potentially contribute to crime prevention efforts. "What do you think motivated your decision to build relationships with criminal organizations?" Dr. Cross asked during one of their interviews. "Greed, ego, and willful ignorance," Charlotte replied with honesty, that contrasted sharply with her previous attempts to justify crypto flow as legitimate innovation. "I convinced myself that I was just providing technology services, but I knew my clients were criminals and I chose to profit from their crimes anyway." This acknowledgement represented significant psychological development from the woman who had initially characterized her prosecution as regulatory overreach and persecution of financial innovation. But Charlotte's transformation was also motivated by her desire to eventually contribute to crime prevention efforts that could help offset some of the harm she had caused through her money laundering operation. "I want to help law enforcement understand how money laundering operations recruit legitimate businesses and professionals," Charlotte explained during another cooperation session with federal prosecutors. "People like me don't start out planning to facilitate terrorism and human trafficking, but we make incremental compromises that lead us deeper into criminal enterprises." Her insights were being used to develop training programs for financial institutions, regulatory agencies, and law enforcement organizations that needed to understand how sophisticated money laundering operations recruited and corrupted legitimate businesses. Charlotte's case demonstrates how quickly a legitimate fintech company can be transformed into a major criminal enterprise, Agent Blackwood explained during a conference on cryptocurrency crime. Her cooperation has provided us with unprecedented insights into how money launderers exploit regulatory gaps and business incentives. But perhaps Charlotte's most important contribution was her willingness to speak honestly about how social media and lifestyle pressures had influenced her decision-making and risk tolerance. I was addicted to the validation and attention that came from documenting my wealth online, she admitted during testimony before a Senate committee investigating cryptocurrency regulation. The social media lifestyle became more important to me than understanding or caring about how my business was generating the profits that funded that lifestyle. This testimony helped policymakers understand how social media culture and celebrity lifestyle pressures could influence financial crime, leading to new approaches to investigating and preventing money laundering that took psychological and social factors into account. 7 years into her sentence, Charlotte received notification that her cooperation with federal authorities had been so extensive and valuable that prosecutors were recommending a reduction in her sentence that could result in supervised release after serving 15 years instead of the original 25-year term. Your continued cooperation and genuine acceptance of responsibility have been exemplary, Prosecutor Margaret Whitmore wrote in her sentencing reduction recommendation. Your testimony has resulted in prosecutions that have significantly disrupted international criminal organizations. But Charlotte understood that early release would require her to continue living under witness protection protocols that would prevent her from returning to anything resembling her previous lifestyle or social media presence. I don't want to return to the person I was before prison, Charlotte told her attorney during discussions about potential early release. That person was willing to enable mass violence and exploitation for personal profit. I'd rather spend extra years in prison than risk becoming that person again. This perspective demonstrated how completely Charlotte's values and priorities had changed during her incarceration and cooperation with law enforcement. As Charlotte continued serving her sentence while helping federal authorities prosecute the criminal organizations she had once served, she understood that her transformation from cryptocurrency CEO to federal witness represented both personal redemption and ongoing service to the communities that had been harmed by her money laundering operation. The social media empress who had celebrated every luxury purchase, funded by criminal proceeds, had become someone who understood the true cost of the lifestyle she had documented online and who was committed to using her remaining years to help prevent others from making the same choices that had led to her imprisonment. Her story had become a cautionary tale about how the pursuit of wealth and social media validation could lead successful professionals to facilitate the world's most dangerous criminal enterprises, but also a demonstration that genuine transformation and meaningful contribution to justice were possible. Even after committing serious financial crimes,